Hi, I'm Alex.
And I'm Eddie.
Welcome to the 5th episode of Catch 52, a politics podcast brought to you by WDSR, Duquesne Student Radio.
We are now 46 weeks away from inauguration in 2021, and we are almost a week removed from Super Tuesday, and everything has changed since our last episode. First, we have to honor all of our fallen candidates.
Tom Steyer,
Amy Klobuchar,
Pete Buttigieg,
Elizabeth Warren,
Michael Bloomberg.
all of them gave something interesting to this campaign, whether it's policy or just money, and most of them will be missed. Soloist did a number on that. That was nice.
Absolutely. We've got a wonderful special guest live in the studio with us today. Joining us now is a man who was formerly the College of William and Mary coordinator of Students for Pete, a man who was twice a state finalist at the Pennsylvania Speech and Debate Championship, a man who once asked me about the possibility of doing a quadruple major with a straight face. Ladies and gentlemen, from the Upper St. Clair High School band room to the campus of William and Mary, and now to the basement of College Hall, Dan Speer.
Howdy, y'all.
So Dan, until quite recently, was the coordinator of Students for Pete. I sent him a text a day before Pete dropped out.
Yep.
And then after we saw the news that night, you sent me a pretty interesting text back saying that you'd have to get back to me about the interview.
Yeah, basically, I actually predicted at the time, I didn't think he was going to drop out, right the heck after that. So, it was just super interesting that I texted you right before all this stuff went down.
Yeah, you had actually texted him a day after I submitted my resume to the Pete campaign.
Oh, yeah.
That's a big oof.
Yeah. But
and 2 days, if I'm not wrong, after you submitted your absentee ballot for Pete.
that is also correct, yes. So I was one of the, I think, 5,000 Pete votes in Virginia that probably all came from absentees.
Yeah, great how your vote mattered, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Well, it's not like it would have. Biden sweeped Virginia pretty handily.
Yeah, Biden ended up with, I think, 53% of the vote, and all but one county.
But let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Yes.
I mean, there's so we say this every time. There's so much to talk about, but let's start in order.
Yes.
First things first. Before we got off the air last week and a half ish ago, the South Carolina primary was just about to happen, and everything was shaken up.
Yes.
Yeah, everything was shaken up. Like I said, when I texted Alex, I didn't expect Pete to be dropping out after South Carolina. I thought he was going to stick it out through Super Tuesday because we've been focusing our ground game basically on getting the Super Tuesday states to turn out. Our chapter just got started in January, so we've been canvassing and phone banking for Nevada, I guess is how you're supposed to say it. So we've been canvassing for. We've been doing canvassing the previous couple of weeks because we've been anticipating that we'd still be going through Super Tuesday. We had no heads up about Pete dropping out or anything like that. And from what I heard from people in our student Slack and all that, it was all very sudden. Decide on the plane from South Bend, that sort of stuff.
Wow.
And then he gave a really, really interesting speech.
Yep.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Basically saying that he was happy to be home and that he loved his husband Chasten so much. Guys, if you didn't know, Pete Buttigieg is gay and he loves his husband very much. His husband is Chasten. He loves his husband very much.
Yep, and they have two dogs, Buddy and Truman.
Yeah, there was a very return to normalcy for himself.
Yeah.
Whereas his campaign was more for the country.
That's fair. And then Joe Biden called him his son, Beau. So.
That was a big feels moment.
That's fair. But Pete's not the only candidate who dropped out. We'll talk about the candidates in order of how interested we are, which isn't fair to one of them. But Steyer, does anybody care?
Steyer put basically all of his hopes in South Carolina that he would be able to turn out enough vote that he would be able to bring that momentum into Super Tuesday. The problem was he was not expecting Bernie to give momentum in Nevada that basically took all of Steyer's hopes away. He ended up in third, not even second, and dropped because of it.
You could almost see like Bernie cutting Steyer's legs out from under him in real time after Nevada.
Yeah, if you looked at the polls, it just slowly chipped away day after day until there was no more Steyer support.
Apparently, he's gonna live there now.
Yeah, because I think his wife moved down there like right before the primary, if I'm not mistaken. And like honestly, like the only reason like I think personally to care about Steyer in this election is because like Bloomberg, it was about money in politics. Like, can you buy your way? Can you buy support?
Yeah.
Because Steyer's been running like. I don't know about y'all, but I've been seeing Steyer ads for the past 4 years on every single not 4 years, every past 2 years on every YouTube video I've watched. So it's about like, can you win an election based with money?
That is really interesting that you've been seeing Steyer ads because all we see are Bloomberg ads.
So Steyer was pressing
I've been seeing
the
that
South
lately.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
Steyer was pressing the South a lot, but he wasn't really trying very hard in Pennsylvania. Bloomberg was trying to win over the Obama-Trump voters, and so he was targeting places like Western Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh area.
But apart from the fact that Steyer is, I guess, now moving to South Carolina, do we care?
Not much. But then,
no, not really.
Less than a day, or just over, about a day after Pete dropped out, Amy Klobuchar also announced that she was dropping out and was immediately endorsing Joe Biden.
It was part of her speech that she was suspending her campaign. Am I right? Yeah.
That she was suspending her campaign and was announcing that she would be meeting Joe Biden in Texas to officially endorse him alongside Beto O'Rourke. And then
that's right, Beto endorsed him too.
And then Pete also showed up to that rally to also endorse him. A little unexpectedly, but also unannounced, but not unexpected, I should say.
True. It was really sort of the coming together party for the moderates.
For the moderates, yeah. Both of their emails of them dropping out mentioned basically just we need they followed Joe's whole unifying the country lingo that he's been running off of, and basically said we need one candidate that can beat Trump and re-heal all the wounds in America.
Is that the sort of the message that the student organization has been getting, or has been that the campaign has been giving student organizations and grassroots movements?
Yeah, basically it was mostly about unifying. It was more about unifying, not necessarily like unifying for the nomination. It wasn't like in that language. It was just about like our goal was to bring the country together via our campaign, and Joe's probably best equipped to do that. I think is what came out of this.
Yeah. So the language. Sorry to interrupt, but because I feel like this is a really interesting point. The language it was very like vague. A unify America language. Did it mention anything about the primary? Did it mention much about the general?
It didn't really. Well, it mentioned it also mentioned like stuff, if I recall correctly, about the general, like the goal is always been to beat Trump, and especially like if you noticed in the emails that Pete was sending out in like weeks leading up to Super Tuesday, you noticed they started to pivot more toward attacking Bernie a lot more. I think that was calculated. I think that was more like they were trying to get the message out that they don't think Bernie's a unifying candidate. So I think that's also what they were saying, was that in the general, Bernie's not going to be able to beat Trump, and they think Biden can be.
And the interesting thing is that's the exact opposite from what you got from Bernie, who all of his campaign emails recently have been Bernie beats Trump. That's been kind of his slogan as of recent, showing the polls coming out that says that he beats Trump and trying to use that as one of his major campaign points.
Right. And well, to be fair, like Klobuchar also was sending out that stuff like in the weeks before the primary. Like she consistently would Trump at like 4 or 5 polls that showed that she would beat Trump, and that's one of the things I found annoying about getting emails from them was just that they would say the same, like it would be using the same quotes all the time.
A very like selective application.
Yeah, I remember both polling. Like all three sent out an email about the same time, right when the news first broke that the Trump team might be wanting Bernie to be their nominee. They're all like, "Oh, the Trump wants Bernie to be their nominee." So that was that you saw a unity in messaging basically the entire campaign, but especially in the weeks leading up to Super Tuesday.
Yeah,
as Bernie was gaining all of his momentum.
Yeah, that's true. So I guess now. We can talk about sort of, I guess, the elephant in the room, which is Amy. So a day before Amy drops out, a few hours before Amy drops out, I remember I was driving up at the time. I had to pull over when I read this come across my phone. Pete Buttigieg, one of the candidates who everybody was saying could go the distance because he had unlimited funds, whether from grassroots or from wine caves, Pete could go the distance. Pete drops out. So Dan, walk us through sort of that day for you. What happened? How much communication did you receive from the campaign? Was there like a central message, or was it just very spontaneous?
Well, so the way it happened was that we were actually I got the first news I heard. I was working on homework. I got a Wall Street Journal blurb on my computer, and I was like, wait, what? This is going on? Granted, like when you're Students for Pete, you're not part of the campaign per se, so we wouldn't have been in the first line of communication, but we did have a designated campaign liaison. We didn't hear it from him first. We heard it through the news first, and then we confirmed it. We had a call with our liaison, I think the next day, and the leadership I think heard about it from him directly, like just a few hours after the news broke.
So you got James Comey, basically, is what you're saying.
It's almost I wouldn't say it was like that. We didn't get like that. I don't think it was that harsh, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah.
But if you remember, 2 years ago must have been when James Comey was fired. He found out watching CNN in a bar, not via any phone call or communication. Yeah. So kind of that same sort of scenario where it was such a sudden decision.
Right. But I was a ground pounder. I wasn't really like in the loop.
Yeah.
So
it's more like James Comey's advisors finding out through CNN versus himself.
Yeah. And so then in the aftermath, you have those meetings. It seems like it was a very, very sporadic thing. What's next for Pete's organization? Because I mean, a lot of these, and we can probably extrapolate this to a lot of the other organizations, because I mean, these have been massive email lists and groups of people that have been built up. They aren't going anywhere.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I will say that the consistent messaging I've been getting from the organizations that Students for Pete was one of the best organized. So we're trying to translate that. So we're doing that in two different ways. So the leadership actually, I think they launched a PAC recently, or they launched certainly an organizing group. They're going to try and help candidates who espouse Pete's values and his ideals. They're going to help them in down ballot races. So right now they're going to translate the grassroots organizing and our campus organizing ability over to that, and helping them organize and maybe eventually do funds, but we'll have to see about that. And then they're also transitioning certain chapters over to Students for Biden.
Okay.
Like at William & Mary, for example, we have 2 students in the Students for Biden chapter, so we're going to try, which is William & Mary is a Bernie bastion, so no surprise there. But we're thinking about linking up with them as well and doing certainly some phone banking for these later states now that Virginia has passed in terms of primaries.
Yeah. So that first half is actually very similar to, and I'm sure all our listeners will love us mentioning this again, but Andrew Yang, just a few days ago announced Humanity Forward, which is
right,
as compared to Humanity First, which was his campaign slogan. So Humanity Forward is almost the same thing, where it's a political organizing group working on getting out youth vote, new voters, all people, just to try and get the Democratic nominee elected.
To try and get humanity forward.
Yes, to try and advance humanity.
Is this a single issue UBI PAC?
No, it's more like all of it seems like more of his other policies. So the
it's worth going through
right now, but it's like all of his 900 policies that he had on his website.
Yeah, and so we can probably compare. We can probably extrapolate that. I don't know if Klobuchar is doing anything similar. I assume that she was not very ingrained with students.
No, I don't think so. Like, there's one Klobuchar. I mean, there's like a couple, I think, at William & Mary, but there was one person who was at the campaign speaking.
I mean, I heard nothing from Students for Bennett after he dropped. So who knows? Who knows?
Students for Bennett existed.
They tried to make it exist. They'd reached out to me earlier in the campaign.
Eddie, the sole Duquesne member, the sole Duquesne student on Bennett's email list.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. So just lots of consolidation then. All right. See, this is the speed we have to go at, because then in the blink of an eye.
Speaking of consolidation, you saw support consolidate among moderate voters almost entirely to Joe Biden.
What can we say to the narrative that Pete's voters, Klobuchar's voters, Steyer and company? What can we say to the narrative that? Because I saw this a lot on like the talking heads and things like that. People saying that, oh, these voters are actually kind of middle of the road for Democrats, and so they'll go both to Biden and Bernie. Did that happen?
It happened in some form, but not nearly to the extent that probably the Bernie campaign would have liked it to happen. So in a state like Minnesota, where Klobuchar had over 40% of the vote, Biden still ended up with 38%. So probably close to 5 to 10% ended up moving from Klobuchar to Bernie. But because you saw in the debates and in the mailing list just such a similar message, and then Klobuchar's outright endorsement of Biden, I don't think, especially in a state like Minnesota, you saw that happen. And then in Virginia, it certainly didn't happen. As we mentioned earlier, one county and then Harrisonburg, where James Madison University is basically the entire population, voted for Sanders, whereas the rest went for Biden. So that was a long sentence. Let me break that down again. Minnesota went almost all the Klobuchar vote went to Biden. Virginia, almost all the Klobuchar and Pete vote went to Biden. So what we didn't see was a large flop over from the moderate voters to the progressive voters at all.
Which is interesting. And I'd like to mention again that the Students for Pete campaign, like Students for Pete organization, they've been doing a lot of their work in Nova, at GMU, at Georgetown, all those places. So I think that there's certainly an explanation there that maybe the Pete organization was able to get more of that vote over than, say, the Bernie organization was, perhaps.
So the Fairfax County and the Northern Virginia region in general is one of the most liberal in the country. Yeah. As someone who grew up there, I can speak to that firsthand. But it still went almost 50% for Biden in effectively a three-way race at that time. And so it was a very surprising vote for a very moderate candidate in this current election. And even the fact that like Arlington and Alexandria, which are even more liberal than Fairfax County went, is very surprising.
Yeah, I mean, just going through the Northern Virginia counties, you see county after county in the Nova area is just going Biden hard. You've got Biden 50% across the board, whether it's Loudoun County, Frederick, Clark, some of these I'm not going to try and pronounce. It's just consistently going for Biden by not only a statistically significant margin, but by a margin that should be very, very concerning to Bernie Sanders supporters.
Absolutely. So another thing Bernie was really hoping for was a large turnout of the youth vote, and he did not get that at all. The youth turnout was lower than it was in 2016.
Yeah.
So,
right. Like, I think it was mentioned, I think I saw a news article that something about how in Vermont he had gotten like 25%, I think, in the 2016 election, or like 25% of the turnout was youth, and it dropped like 5% to this election. Okay. So it's interesting. It's interesting that he's maybe not resonating, or maybe maybe, I don't know. I honestly don't know why they wouldn't turn out. Like, if his message has the same power, why aren't they turning out?
Well, I mean, as far as, I don't want to say, the turnout, no, it didn't fold over, because that's not quite right. The shine has worn off, maybe?
Perhaps, yeah.
I mean, and it was diluted because of other candidates. Like, I feel like as far as candidates that the youth were interested in, that did get diluted a little bit. I mean, you had a lot of people who were definitely very
charismatic. Yeah,
you had, I mean, Pete. As far as charisma goes, you have Pete at the top of that list. As far as, for idea candidates, I'm sure some of them, myself included, at the beginning went for Warren. Mm-hmm. And you had people looking at what Yang was saying and being very attracted to that, because it's just, I mean, it's an entertaining campaign, and it's also a new, fresh message that. And I mean, as much as Bernie's message, I think, is still widely appealing to a lot of left-wing students, it's not as fresh anymore. Mm-hmm. Healthcare is not at the top of a lot of students' priorities, and as we've discussed repeatedly, healthcare is sort of the first plank of Bernie's narrative.
Right. Yep. So the youth vote only rose from 2016 to 2020 in the Super Tuesday states in 4 of them by more than like 3%. Whereas in the 65 plus vote, it raised significantly in 10 of the 12. So older Democrats are turning out way more than in the past as compared to young voters.
Who are they turning out for, though? I believe they're turning out for Biden.
Almost exclusively Biden.
Is that the fear of socialism argument that we keep hearing about?
Is that the Chris Matthews, the Chris Hardball argument? It could be.
It's very interesting that you'll see. So in South Carolina, especially, you saw almost double the turnout from 2016 to 2020 for 65 plus voters.
Yes.
Whereas you saw only an 8% change in young voters.
Yeah. So this talking about turnout, this I think is the main takeaway that we leave Super Tuesday from.
Mm-hmm.
And what's wild is that, I mean, turnout was up across the board. Turnout was up in Virginia. It was up in
It was up in all 12 states.
in all 12 states.
There were
Obviously
some,
California, Texas.
Like Iowa only had 2% increase. Same with like Oklahoma. Texas was slightly more, but
Iowa really was a red herring this year.
it was. Well, a lot was wrong about Iowa.
And actually,
But
I can
we've-
talk about that a little bit. Like, I noticed when in the emails I was getting from the Pete campaign, like just their general emails, like a lot of groundwork went into Iowa and New Hampshire, which was, I think, their strategy was to get the votes there and then ride that momentum through Super Tuesday. I'm not sure I necessarily agreed with that strategy when I kind of saw it, but I think that I agree with the red herring assertion that like because the only reason I think Pete did really that well in Iowa was because, one, the demographics were favorable to him. I will admit that Pete as a candidate doesn't have the best demographic appeal. And then two, just that he was able to invest so much money and so much ground game into Iowa. I think that's why he won, was because in comparison to, say, like, we were doing a lot for Super Tuesday and we did some stuff for South Carolina, but we didn't do as much investment. Same thing with Nevada. We called in a fair amount to Nevada, but it wasn't as concentrated an effort as Iowa. We've been focusing on Iowa for like 3 months straight.
Yeah.
If we didn't win Iowa, that would have been probably a dropout moment.
Yeah.
And what you saw from the Pete campaign was this push, like you said, for that momentum. But ultimately, when you looked at the polls before Super Tuesday, one reason I think CNN speculated that he dropped out was because he wasn't poised to get 15% in any state. And you need 15% to get any delegates.
Right.
And if he wasn't going to be viable anywhere, what was the point
Exactly.
of staying in after Super Tuesday if you're not?
Well, it was before Super Tuesday, so it was mainly to avoid an electoral embarrassment, because what he probably would have seen is Pete get 0 delegates, which is fewer than Tulsi Gabbard got at 2.
That's true.
Right. And that's something like they've been kind of counting on a Super Tuesday delegate haul to kind of keep them viable, is kind of the impression I got.
Yeah.
And because, I mean, even regardless of that, you had viability pressures across the board. I mean, particularly talking about in California. I think the idea that Bernie was going to win California was, everybody agreed that Bernie was winning California. The question was, by what margin, and what would the delegate haul be? Because you had, especially going into it, you had the question of, is Biden going to make viability, which I believe he did. And not on top of that, you had Bloomberg making viability, and I don't believe Bloomberg made viability either. Warren almost did as well in California. So if you could have had 4 candidates being viable in California, which screws over the Sanders delegate strategy.
California's viability was only 10%.
Oh,
so
maybe I think Warren was viable then.
Yes, Warren got 5 delegates, Bloomberg got 1. Biden got 129 and Sanders got 175. So he won, but it was not Biden, that scorching victory that he was hoping at all.
And then that's why. So that brings us into then I guess the aftermath of Super Tuesday, because not only Pete drops out before Super Tuesday. Yes, they do that endorsement run. You have then 2 very telling campaign suspensions that I think speak to an important narrative in the direction that the campaign is going after at Super Tuesday. You have Bloomberg drop out immediately after getting after winning American Samoa
and nothing else.
And then in a somewhat surprising move, I think it shocked a lot of people, especially since she was until dropping out, she was talking about going the distance
all the way to the convention.
Elizabeth Warren announced that she would be suspending her campaign.
Right. Yes.
It was late this week. It was Friday or Saturday.
Yes, I believe it was Friday.
Yeah. So Warren suspends Friday, and this is so we can talk about a little bit about these 2 campaigns.
Yeah.
And again, in order of interest.
Well, I say we reverse this. So let's talk about Bloomberg first, since we have a lot more to talk about with Warren.
Yeah.
So with Bloomberg, I think that was the ultimate sign that with Democrats, money will not get you elections.
Right. Thank goodness.
Exactly. It'll get you 15% of the vote nationally, which is
disturbing,
but
not unexpected.
Won't get you any farther than a debate or 2. And I think we saw at that second debate the outright rejection of a billionaire candidate trying to use his money to win the election in the Democratic Party.
I would definitely concur with that. Like after, like, basically that you maybe if you're a Republican, you want to run a spoiler candidacy, it might be a good way to go, but you have to have all that backing.
Yeah, and that backing is going to come entirely from your own wallet. It was really nice to see the rage that came with people. The idea of Bloomberg being the nominee, Bloomberg running, it just leaves us. It clearly left a sour taste in a lot of people's mouths, mine included. So the idea that he was just completely flattened was honestly kind of satisfying.
Yes, it was. I know for a lot of people, very nice to watch the debate where for the first hour or so, every single candidate just took their time to attack Bloomberg and no one else.
Party unity.
Yes. If the party can unify against Bloomberg that well, it's a telling sign and a hopeful sign against the other racist, sexist billionaire from New York.
Yes, and definitely. So then definitely more interesting, and I think more of a long-term story that will, depending on if she endorses anybody, this is more interesting. So the Warren dropping out and proceeding to not endorse anybody.
Yes, so that was another big hit to the Sanders campaign.
Yeah.
The silence that has happened after Warren's dropout, where she suspended her campaign and has yet to make an endorsement.
Has there been any? Duquesne is not a big. I mean, you've got some Bernie presence here, but it's very scattered. Duquesne's not really a very political campus in that sense. But I would probably say just because students, and now because of the state of the race, most students who are politically active and Democrats are probably supporting Bernie. What is the vibe on at William and Mary in a more active campus? Because I know that there is on other campuses that there's kind of a rift between supporters of Warren and supporters of Bernie. How has it changed at all? Were there no Warren supporters to begin with?
Well, I mean, so you obviously see a lot more Bernie supporters. Like I've only been to a few Young Democrats meetings because of time. Warren had her supporters at those meetings, but there definitely weren't as many. I don't think there was a distinct rift. Like I think there's more of a conception that it's moderates versus liberals at least at William and Mary, because like that's certainly the vibe that I got as someone who self-identifies as independent moderate, that like it's more like they don't want an independent moderate because they think that now's the time for change. So as long as Warren's probably not like I don't think Bernie supporters would think that she's the best choice, but if she had been the nominee, they would have probably rolled with her fairly well and not dropped out in terms of turnout.
Yeah,
definitely.
Which is why I think we have to worry about in 2020. If like same thing that happened in 2016, like will the Bernie bros show up to vote for whoever the Democratic nominee is?
It's definitely a concern. I think
Absolutely.
This election, there's a lower chance of a low turnout like that, purely for the fact that Trump is already the president and that low turnout was seen. So what we mentioned in our first episode, that the odds that a moderate will vote for a progressive are way lower than progressives voting for a moderate to get a Republican out of office.
And the constant counter argument that a lot of that Bernie people will bring up is it's a question of who you're trying to get to show up on election day.
Right.
Yes.
And if we are going to go with moderates, then moderates are going to show up and the partisans are going to show up. So if you're that reasonable degree of progressive, even if you were a Bernie supporter, like a politically active Bernie supporter, your chances are you're going to show up and vote for whoever has the D next to their name, even if it's Joe Biden or if it's Bernie Sanders. But what the Bernie Sanders people would say, and you can see this in a lot of like internet, like echo chambers, forums, stuff like that, or that is that you're going to the Bernie supporters, a good deal of them just won't show up, or and we did see this a little bit in 2016. They'll vote for other candidates. They'll vote for Gary Johnson and Jill Stein, and before you go saying, oh, that doesn't matter, they only got 2 or 3%. That vote going to Hillary would have flipped the election.
Yes, if I think a tenth of Jill Stein voters in Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania and Ohio had voted for Hillary, Hillary would be our president right now.
And do you think a tenth of Jill Stein voters would have voted for Bernie Sanders?
Absolutely.
So there you go.
Right.
It's not just, I feel like it's not as clear cut as just saying, oh, well, you've got to get the biggest coalition together. There's 2 ways you can do that. That said, let's talk about turnout, because the Biden campaign quite correctly has been throwing out some really astonishing numbers when it comes to turnout.
Yes.
Especially South Carolina. Just to pull up because This, in my opinion, this is the narrative of the race right now, and this is what people should be talking about. Democratic partisans, when it comes to who do we need to nominate in order to defeat Trump. And if politics is really a game about getting people to show up, you can just look at turnout. So I've got right now in front of me the 2008 South Carolina Democratic primary numbers. 532,500 people showed up. That was the historic numbers. This is 2008, all right?
Yeah.
About half of those voted for Obama. 55.5% voted for Obama. Now I've got the 2020 South Carolina primary numbers. Well, let's first preface this by saying 2016 South Carolina primary, 375,000 people showed up.
That's pretty steep decrease in turnout.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not a lot of excitement in the South. 2020, 524,000 people show up to the South Carolina Democratic primary.
So similar to Obama numbers. We have to keep in mind that South Carolina also is not growing particularly fast. It's not on track to gain or lose any electoral votes. So that number being within 10,000 or close to 10,000 is not insignificant at all.
Absolutely. So this is the central narrative, in my opinion. And this is by the way, that 524,000 number, that's with 94% of precincts reporting. I'm just looking at I'm looking at a Vox News article.
So there's a chance of a few more thousand votes coming in.
So let's say maybe what is it?
Maybe like another 2,000 or something.
Yeah.
500. So 500. Yeah, 524. We can just stick with that. Is it fair to take that number and say Biden is drawing out the Obama coalition? Go Biden.
In South Carolina, I think that is a promising statistic, but you also have to keep in mind South Carolina Democrats are the type of coalition that got Obama, the type of voters in South Carolina, and not just based on race, but also on moderate policy and policy views and everything like that. Those are the voters that are going to that got Obama elected by turning out in record numbers. So if those voters turn out again, that is a good sign. I think South Carolina might not be representative of the entire country in the same way Iowa's not, though.
Yeah, I agree. I was going to say, I think I don't think it's necessarily, if that coalition that Biden brought out in South Carolina shows up, that's great, but I don't think that's the coalition that's nationwide. I think there are other groups, granted, I'm biased in this, and I'm going to say that Pete's endorsement maybe helped Biden a little bit in that regard. Maybe he was able to get having his endorsement gave him a little bit of a boost and helped that coalition stay turned out instead of dividing it among the moderates. I'm saying that not necessarily that we're reviving the Obama coalition from 2008, but that
the O'Biden coalition.
Yeah, the O'Biden coalition. Yep. What I'm saying is that maybe it's a different type of coalition. I think there was an article on CNN about how all these new charismatic candidates brought in new people into politics. So I think it's a new coalition he's building, not just the Obama coalition, but also.
Let's talk about that new coalition then.
Yeah.
What are the people that are getting brought in that are new? What are the new additions?
So I'm guessing some of the more at least from my perspective, it's some of the more moderate folks, and also some folks who are progressive but not so far progressive that they might choose Bernie.
Pivotal Democratic voter, if that sounds like that to me.
Exactly.
So I think just some more numbers that might help that case is if we, I know we're ragging on Iowa and we will continue to do so until the end of time. But if we look at, just because it's the most relevant statistic I can think of off the top of my head, if you look at the Iowa exit polls this year, 62% of voters turned out saying that they were voting based on who they thought would be the best person to defeat Trump.
Yes.
And I feel like that was something that we saw across the board. We didn't see people saying, I am voting for Medicare for all. I am voting for redoing Obamacare if that's what Biden wants.
Yeah.
I am voting for making all 2-year colleges free. We saw people coming out and saying, I am voting for somebody against somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Are we worried that that's kind of...
Yeah, that's a fair point.
Yeah, it's definitely something that concerns me because right now, what I brought up, I think I brought it up in the past in the podcast, is name one Hillary Clinton policy. I'll give this challenge to you.
Yes.
Name one Hillary Clinton policy.
We need to start doing this more.
Oh boy. I think not release your emails. That's the only one I can
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, can you?
You just proved our point.
Yeah.
Name
I
a
know.
Bernie. Name a Donald Trump policy.
Border wall, obviously.
All right.
That's the first one that comes to mind.
Name a Bernie policy.
Medicare for all.
Like there you go. So
Boom.
the thing that gets candidates momentum and popularity is having something that people can rally behind in policy, not
Right, like
just in
Douglas plan or something like that.
yeah.
Yeah, but who out of a random,
Yeah.
just your average Jim coming down on the street is going to say,
Yeah,
"Oh, I'm going to vote for Pete. He's got the Douglas plan."
Yeah, no, your
Not
average
as
Jim
good as the
from
Douglas
Ben
plan
Affleck's
was.
not going to do that. So, like
Yes.
the Pete definitely had those moments with like Medicare for all who want it, and especially earlier in his campaign when he was doing a lot of TV interviews, he had a lot of those catchphrases that could excite people. Biden so far has not. Biden has kind of so far just embraced the Hillary train of we need to
Yeah.
bring this country together, we need to heal our wounds, we need to fix our brokenness and
Yeah,
beat Donald
but
Trump.
And
I
no
will-
malarkey.
But I will say that Hillary had something. Joe has something that Hillary will never have, and that is Joe Mentum.
If
And no
that's what you want to
malarkey.
call it. Yeah.
Yep, and no malarkey.
So-
Hey, he's also got the folks.
Yeah. So my biggest fear is that Biden will just focus on beating Trump because that is exactly what lost the Democrats 2016.
Right, and like the problem, like there was an opinion piece about how like the thing that's gonna hurt Biden coming up is that they're gonna bring up Hunter Biden every single chance they get, and if they focus the narrative on that, and if Biden focuses on I can beat Trump, and then they focus on Biden's family, that's going to lose them the election. It needs to be I guess like I agree with what y'all are saying that it needs to be a refocusing on policies.
Yes.
Which is precisely where it again concerns me because Biden, when we talk about Biden policies, I only started looking into them because I realized that he's probably going to be the nominee. So I'm like, okay, what are Biden policies that people can grasp onto,
Yeah.
can definitively say?
Right, and they actually I'm on their Student for Biden Slack. They just put out a bunch. Well, they just started the Slack, but they just put out a bunch of policy guidelines too. So I think they're maybe what you're saying is like what I'm seeing too is that they're just starting to get defined policies out because they're realizing it's starting to turn into a
Well,
slugfest.
if you look at the job hiring sites, Bernie is not hiring anyone for policy because Bernie's had his policies since the 70s and they have not changed.
Say what you will about them.
Yeah. Biden is hiring policy analysts and policy outreach coordinators and a bunch of people to help him sculpt a policy. And it's a little worrying to me. Also, this isn't something that's going to reach outside of the political sphere, but it is worrying within this political sphere that now he's hiring policy
Exactly.
people.
Like you can totally extrapolate from the goings on in the political realm and say that if this is the state of your campaign, it does not bode well for when your campaign enters the
Yeah,
the
'cause
apolitical realm.
The elections are in, give or take, 8 months. And
You think 8 months is enough time to come out with a
Yeah.
solid policy that
I
not
mean-
only represents a diverse array of democratic interests, but also interests that you think will appeal to the American people as opposed to Trump
Yeah.
on so many different issues that I feel like have been defining moments of the Trump presidency.
And keep in mind, Trump's main platform was announced day one when he came down that escalator and said they're bringing their worst. Biden's been in the race for 11 months now. He
He has no
announced
platform.
he announced on April 25th, 2019. It is now March 8th, 2020, and he is now hiring his policy people. That I think to me is very, very worrying, and he needs to get something together fast.
To be fair, if you are Biden, you do have like his several years of legislative experience, so you can build on that and knowing
Absolutely, yeah.
that'll help a little bit. But that's going to be him time sharing his time with those policy analysts and him campaigning, so that's going to slow him down a little bit.
It could, but I feel like going into this part of the season, though, I mean, if he's got it wrapped up, now is definitely the time for Biden to take the foot off the gas a little bit and step back and say, let me hash out the rest of my campaign, which is wild that he's doing it. But the fact is that's just the reality.
I mean, to be fair, they do have like I'm just looking at the Slack text they sent us. They gave us like 20 or 25 policies, I think.
Sure.
In just one text.
But the fact that they're only giving, I mean, sure, Pete dropping out, you getting added to that text might be offsetting this a little bit, but I feel like those are probably policy guidelines that they only released quite recently.
Mm-hmm.
It's just very worrisome because this gets to one of the other things that we constantly harp on here on the show, which is that in order to be a successful candidate, you have to have a definable narrative. That's what we tested with you just now.
Yep.
So
I'm very concerned. Do you think this is I think something worth debating. Do you think that that Biden, I've called him O'Biden almost already. This is not going well. Do you think that Biden being Obama's vice president and saying I will restore the Affordable Care Act. Do you think that's something that he has the potential to run on successfully?
And so, like, my personal opinion, restoring the Affordable Care Act, I don't think that's necessarily. See, the problem with restoring the Affordable Care Act is that we've had almost, what has it been? Almost 16 years, not 16 years, like 12 years of Affordable Care Act. I think the problem is that, like, there's so much taboo surrounding it that it's not, like, it's going to help. It's going to help you with that moderate coalition that really, really liked the Affordable Care Act as originally conceived by Ted Kennedy and all those folks.
Yeah.
But once you get to like younger demographics, and certainly once you get into moderate demographics, people are going to start remembering more like problems with the rollout, problems with all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to, I don't think you can run solely on that platform of restoring it. I think you have to say you have to improve it.
So while the main goal of Democratic voters is beating Trump, the main policy concern of Democratic voters is Medicare or is healthcare.
Right.
And so I think having just a policy of, make Obamacare great again, could we call it that?
It's the status
like,
quo.
It totally could be.
Having the restore the status quo issue on, I mean, that's what John McCain ran on in 2008, and we all know how that went.
Yeah.
That's what Mitt Romney ran on in 2012 on repealing Obamacare, and we all know how well repeal and replace did for the Republicans. So
The
I don't
American
know.
Health Care Act was great.
I don't know if improve and install, I guess, would be Joe Biden's version.
Improve and install. Man, that really rolls off the tongue.
Yeah,
doesn't it?
I don't know if just revamped Obamacare would do that. And kind of on the topic of policies, if you look at their websites, Biden has 28 policies listed on his website. Bernie
28
has
more than I expected.
Bernie has about 50.
There you go.
So almost twice. Now, for reference, Andrew Yang had over 150 policies. So
Jeez. Gosh almighty.
there are different ways to do that. But the thing is, with Yang, like name an Andrew Yang policy.
Obviously, the UBI.
Like
Bingo.
he had the ability to get his message out there in a way that that Biden has not. That Biden's message is the same message Hillary had, and that's let's bring America back. It's not unlike Ronald Reagan's message in 1980.
I mean, that worked for him then.
It worked for him,
But
also that was running. So
I feel like that's a much easier message for conservatives, or at least the right.
Typically-
to sell.
right, because we're split between, like, liberals are split between the status quo and radical change of the status quo.
a big structural change, as Elizabeth Warren said. But typically, the Progressive
Big
Party,
structural change.
the Progressive Party is typically not saying, "Let's go back to this." I mean, by definition, that's not what they're saying as a progressive party.
Exactly. It goes against the fundamental, dare I say, physics of the political realm that we exist in right now.
Constant improvement forever and ever.
Typically, for the past, probably since FDR, I'd say the Democrats have been saying, let's do this policy, new policy, policy. And Republicans have been saying, not this policy, undo this, undo this, undo this. And there has been this give and take for almost 100 years now on that same topic.
So beyond, I don't know, he does, so as far as Biden's policy goes, and we will definitely need to take an entire episode to dive into these a little
Absolutely.
bit more.
We're going to have to do a head-to-head episode on Bernie versus Biden.
Biden, as far as Biden's policies go, I know that Affordable Care Act he's going to talk about that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But I think he's got making 2-year colleges free. That's something that he's talked about in the debates multiple times. And that's actually something I can personally get behind. I think that's exactly the right way to go.
Foreign policy is also one of his big issues too.
Foreign I don't know how well that's going to go though.
He also has, so if you look at he has a Central American policy, an immigration policy, an infrastructure policy, military family, veteran policy. He also has a agenda for the Catholic community alongside the Latino community, the Black community, and the LGBTQ community. So
virtue signaling to the Catholics.
That's interesting, to say the least. But
no, because Catholics as a Catholic, you occupy a very, very, you straddle both lines. Honestly.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree.
So you do have to kind of you pander to them when you can.
But it's unique, but I don't know if that's anything that's actually going to flip, because Catholics are typically one of the most democratic of the practicing Catholic or the practicing Christian varieties.
Typically, yes.
Yeah. So now with that out of the way, I mean, it's not like this is over yet. It's still a 2-person race. Sorry, Chelsea.
We can't forget Tulsi Gabbard is the only person that has been a Democrat their entire life that's still running.
Yeah.
Joe and Bernie were both in Congress as independents. So if you want a lifelong Democrat, I guess your only real vote now is Tulsi Gabbard.
Imagine. And so with what little time we have left, let's talk about the future, because there's still a race happening, and there will it's going to be heated, to say the least.
Yes.
We have the second round of Super Tuesday primaries. I don't know. I like our name. I like Duper Tuesday a lot better.
So there are a few states voting. It's going to be Louisiana, Maine, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, Idaho, Michigan, Mississippi, Missouri, North Dakota, and Washington. I believe
states voting. Dear God, what has Raphael done to us?
And then Virgin Islands and Guam are voting on the Thursday afterwards. So it's not nearly as big in population, in number of states, or in importance in delegates, but it is still a significant number. And we're going to see, Washington and Michigan voting, and Maine also, which is a very pivotal state in the Senate races.
Yeah, we'll see. I feel like, the polls show that Susan Collins is in for a rough election this time around, and so we might get a sneak peek of that in the primary. But let's talk about sort of the elephant in the room, which is there's really at least in my opinion, there's one state that matters this Tuesday, and that state is Michigan, because you've got there's not only is there so much history in Michigan electorally, but there's so much history for Michigan policy-wise as well. Electorally, it's the state that sort of made Bernie's campaign in the 2016 primary. But lest we forget, especially as we see the economy falling down around our ears, it's the state. It's the sort of the start of the Recovery Act, where the auto industry was bailed out by the Obama administration in 2000. The bailout started in like 2010.
Yeah,
around then.
So there's a lot of history, I think, that Biden can capitalize on in Michigan.
Yeah, and I think what you'll largely see in Michigan is where does the enthusiasm of Democrats lie in the states that will matter in the general. If Biden wins Michigan by any significant margin, that's a really, really bad sign for Bernie, because that shows that the enthusiasm of the Obama-Trump voters is not with him, but is instead with the moderate.
Dan, what's your guess right now? I've got a RCP Michigan poll in front of me, conducted by Detroit News. Let's take a guess on the spread.
Oh gosh, on the spread, it's probably I'd probably say less than 5 points, obviously.
Yeah, it's around that from what I've seen.
Biden +6.
Interesting.
Whoa,
okay, so if you I'm looking at 538 here. You see a 68% 77% chance that Biden wins, but the average win
Michigan?
is in Michigan. Yeah, the average win is at 51% of the vote. So
it's going to be very close.
It's going to be a really close race, but it's probably going to end with Biden on top.
I'm gonna piggyback off this RCP poll that I've just mentioned. So this is a really interesting poll for a few reasons. It was conducted on March 4th, so they were polling for not only Biden and Sanders, but Bloomberg, Warren, Buttigieg, Klobuchar as well. Biden still came out +6, which is wild to me. But you've got Sanders at 23, so Biden at 29, Sanders at 23, Bloomberg at 11, Warren at 7, Buttigieg at 6, Klobuchar 3.
Mm-hmm. So assume those 9 from Buttigieg and Klobuchar go straight to Biden, as it seems like they did on Super Tuesday.
And that 11 from Warren, or 11 from Bloomberg, excuse me.
Possibly. We haven't seen where Bloomberg's vote goes yet.
Right.
And we can probably say with relative certainty that Warren's vote will go to Bernie. Probably.
It might.
Well,
there's going to be a splintering of the coalition, of all the coalitions. I think.
I don't think that it's going to go all the way to Bernie. I really don't.
I'd say it's going to go at least 2/3 to Bernie.
Well, 2/3.
But that's enough to win it for Biden.
Yeah,
but
2/3 is enough to win it. Yeah, I'd say 2/3 is probably fair.
Yeah.
But still, Bernie needs all of it to have any kind of a shot.
Yes.
In addition to that, have you seen any other polls regarding that Michigan primary? Because the rest of it is looking really bad for Bernie. He's moved his campaign out of the South. He's just completely ceded that to Biden. And then on top of that, continuing on after that, it looks terrible for Bernie. Biden is winning by 47 points in Florida.
And if you look at if you look at national polls, basically in the span of a week, Biden's gone from 17 to 47%.
Yes.
He's polling higher than he ever has in this election. Even like the day he announced his campaign, he's polling higher than that. Speculative polling, he's polling higher than that. He is the strongest he has been so far. And Bernie is stronger than he's been in a while, but still not nearly as strong, and he does not have the momentum.
And then just to go into some of these other states, I mean, these were considered to be solid Sanders states until quite recently. You've got Washington State. There's an RCP, so Data for Progress. This is a Data for Progress, which is a left-leaning Sanders associated think tank, conducted a poll in Washington State. Biden +3, which is within the margin of error, but still, this is a progressive think tank.
Right, so it's going to be like a Rasmussen poll. It's going to be like, it's probably the actual results may be like +8.
Yeah, it's not looking good, and this is Washington State. Oregon, I believe, also no, Oregon's not.
Oregon's a little later, I believe.
Oregon's a little later, but Washington State was polled this way. North Dakota as well was supposed to be Bernie. That's going Biden. As far as the South, I mean, we already covered that. Maine is a toss-up, which is very concerning, especially since that Bernie is neighboring. It's a neighboring state for Bernie.
Well, Maine is also a very moderate state. Is
True.
I mean, Susan Collins is the most moderate senator, maybe save Lisa Murkowski.
Yeah.
So
it's going to be a lot to talk about next week.
Well, there is one more thing we have to talk about, and that's the other Super Tuesday that happened, the Super Tuesday for Donald Trump, in which he won every single delegate that was contested, giving Bill Weld still his one delegate that he has from Iowa.
You know what? Let's give it up for Bill Weld, all right?
Yeah, I mean,
Bill Weld.
Bill Weld, you have to give him credit. Bill Weld has almost as many delegates as Tulsi Gabbard.
Wait, almost. Oh, wait, yeah, 2. I forgot.
Tulsi has 2. Bill Weld has 1. But, you know, we should just address the fact the Republican primaries are happening.
At least they've coalesced around an opposition candidate.
Hey, he has an endorsement.
Yeah.
Governor of New Hampshire.
So, Bill Weld has 1 delegate. Trump is already 2/3 of the way to having the necessary delegates, whereas Biden is maybe a quarter of the way there. So you see a big difference between that.
Yeah, and I mean, even if Biden doesn't win outright on the second ballot, the superdelegates come in and they will just
So
the tide will come in and
the moderate wave as opposed to the blue wave.
Boy, yeah.
So Trump's, you know, they have primaries in the most quote unquotes that you can add to the phrase. They canceled the one in South Carolina. I'm not sure the reason behind it. I just assume it's just because it's kind of unnecessary to have primaries when your only opponent is Bill Weld. No offense to Bill Weld, but
that's fair. Yeah. But I mean, Trump has started to do a lot more campaign events. He did his first town hall, and it's going to be worth covering, especially as Biden is hashed out now. I think formally, boy, our predictions didn't age well.
Not at all.
But now, as it is hashed out, and Biden is sort of confirmed in every informal sense of the word as the nominee, you're going to see Trump start to sort of ramp up the campaign events. I mean, his email lists have been going crazy the past few days.
So we'll see all that, and we will get back to you in about 4 days with what's been going on.
Yeah, absolutely. It's it's now 8:58 on this Sunday evening,
and so we are just going to wrap it up for the day.
Our intro and outro music is by Paul Abrams and Rock Solid Panda, produced by Elise Duna. Our signal monitor is James Wallace. Dan, thank you for coming on today.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Alex.
You can find of course. You can find a recording of this podcast on our YouTube channel, on Spotify, SoundCloud, or wherever you find your podcasts. Make sure to also follow us on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter to stay updated on all news Catch 52.
We welcome your comments, your feedback, and suggestions. As I said, it's now 8:58. We will see you at our normal time next week on Thursday. Have a great weekend.